The usage rates for the 4.6 Spiral Abyss are out, so we're going to go over them, talk about what is surprising, what is not, and we'll use this time to expand on my previous Spiral Abyss video to both talk about the current meta and to help you get your 36 stars. Welcome to Jello Impact, where we build and test every single character to help you decide who you want to wish for and build. I don't know what Reddit has a problem with zooming in. So first of all, let's talk about the usual misconceptions with the usage statistics. High usage rate does not mean the character is the best character. It just means that they're the most popular character per the amount of accounts that own them. So 85% of accounts that have Furina used Furina. Next, the S plus SAB is very arbitrary and misleading. I mean, it makes it more clickable, so I'm obviously, sympathetic to them putting it within these tiers, but the tiers are arbitrary, like Navia being 19.1 B and Shenyan being 20.4 A. It is whatever. And there's a couple things that this implies or that this affects. Like, characters with more overlapping roles will be punished with a tier list like this. And characters that are 4 stars will also be punished by metrics like this. So you kind of have to take everything with a huge, massive grain of salt. All that being said, I still think that this is useful information. This is information that shows what most people are using. And I think that's pretty valuable. I think it's good to see what people are actually using and what they're finding success with. This is Chinese data as well. So it is more skewed to having 5-star weapons and having early constellations than we have. It's much, much more common out there, and it is a very large sample size. I don't remember exactly how much, but I looked at it before, and it's like many thousands of players. So in terms of what it represents, it does represent it very accurately, but we should know about those things before we really try and glean stuff about it. So first of all, Furina being at the top of the list, this is no surprise. Furina is, in my opinion, the strongest character in the game, so having her up high makes sense, but also having Hydro is really good in this Abyss, and having her being able to instantly break the shield of Capellius on the first side also makes her very good, so she's very good on both sides. She's very strong in general, so it makes sense that she's so high up on the list. Kazuha, super good on the second side. It's so nice to have him there. He's pretty good on the first side too, but the second side is where it's at for Kazuha. It just makes the second side on easy mode if you have him. Novelet being next makes absolute sense. For most people, Novelet will be the best DPS. As I said in my top 5, I think that there is a case for Arlecchino to be the strongest DPS, but people don't have her full talent materials. They don't have her. She's definitely harder to play. So a lot of people will just prefer to use Novelet, so it makes sense that Novelet's higher. And his damage is absolutely insane, especially when you do have his weapon or constellations, and like I said, a lot of people that reported on this list do. Bennett makes sense. This Abyss really wants Pyro, especially if you have C6 Bennett. It's even easier on the second side. If you're having trouble clearing those Electors, C6, and it could be time to C6 your Bennett. Zhongli, always at the top of these lists. People love using Zhongli, the best in the game at what he does. Arlecchino, another top DPS. Yelan, here's the thing. Furina, Yelan, and Xingqiu all do similar things. So this is what I'm talking about. If only one of these characters existed, then they would be... whoever existed would be in the top tier. But because they all exist and you can only use 2 of 3 realistically, I mean, I guess you possibly could use Furina on one side and both Xingqiu and Yelan on the other, or vice versa, like use 2 of them on one. But the fact that they all exist means that they're going to split the vote, as it were. And some of them are going to be down lower, so this makes perfect sense to me. I tend to actually prefer Xingqiu in this particular Abyss to Yelan. I do think Yelan is overall the better character, but the AoE and the damage reduction that Xingqiu can provide, I tend to prefer slightly. But if you're using Zhongli anyways, then on the first side, for example, then Yelan is just better than Xingqiu. So there's that as well. Baizhu, excellent character. I think people are mostly using him with Novelet, is what I'm guessing. We can take a look at the top teams as well. Yeah, Novelet with Baizhu. What other teams are people using Baizhu? I don't even know. I think the other Baizhu teams are not that popular. Like, you could use Baizhu on the first side with Nilou and then use Furina to break Capellius' shield. That's probably pretty good. I think Nilou on the first side is actually, if you have Baizhu and Furina, is actually pretty good. I'm not exactly sure what other teams you use Baizhu on. Yeah, there it is. The Nilou Furina, the Furina team, more Baizhu with Novelet. I think Baizhu is an excellent character. But I have been wondering, like, what all teams, like, to see him this high on the usage rate. Like, Aggravate isn't very popular anymore. Using him as a Hyper Bloom driver isn't very popular. You kind of usually want Nahida on the team. So being on Novelette teams and on Neely teams, I think he's a great character, but I see him, I don't know. I really like that he gives interruption resistance as well as the healing. That is a really, really nice middle ground for a healer. Nahida being a bit lower than Baiju. This is kind of interesting, right? Nahida is obviously a much, much stronger character than Baiju, but Dendro kind of isn't that good for this Abyss unless you're using that Neely team I mentioned on the first side. Like Hyper Bloom, not that great unless you're doing Novelette Hyper Bloom, but Novelette Hyper Carry is sort of better than Nahida, so Burgeon's obviously very good on the second side of the Abyss, all different types of Burgeon, and Nahida is often played in Burgeon. I guess you could do Baiju Burgeon on the second side too. It's just not like a super popular team, as it doesn't, you know, usually 5-star teams are just more popular. So Baiju Burgeon, even though it's really good on the second side, you probably do something like Baiju Singcho, Toma, and then either Nahida or Fischl or something like that. Probably Nahida is probably just better. Yeah, because Fischl, you kind of want to use Fischl more when you're using Nahida as the solo Dendro applicator because you want the Dendro. But this is like sort of a niche team, and it's not going to like drive the usage rates of Nahida. And because Alhaitham is quite a bit lower in this Abyss, like Alhaitham's very strong, but this team just isn't synergistic. This Abyss isn't super synergistic with Dendro. Probably your best bet is Alhaitham with Farina to, again, on the first side to break Capelli's shield, and that's going to be very, very strong. Singcho, Shangling, of course, the second side, you really need lots of Pyro, so that makes sense. Kuki, people, like, you're not using a ton of Hyper Bloom, but they are using Hyper Bloom. Kuki's also often used with Novelette, actually, so that's she's probably, her usage is derived up from that. Novelette, Hyper Bloom, Alhaitham Spread, Quick Bloom, Raiden being a bit lower. It makes sense because Raiden is good on the second side and good on the first side if you have, but there's lots of options, right? There's DPSs, there's only so many options, so she's pretty high in terms of DPS. Like if you look at just DPSs, we have Novelette, Arlecchino, and then Raiden. Of course, Raiden is a support as well. She's not just a DPS, so you're using her as an alternative to Kuki, or as a driver for National, or as a hyper carry with Chevreuse. Lots of different ways to use Raiden. That's why she's going to be a bit higher than a lot of characters, but quite a significant down. And Arlecchino, of course, she's new, so that's also probably why she's so high up. I don't expect she would be this high if she had been out for a while, but maybe she would. Maybe she's just that strong. Alhaitham, Hu Tao makes sense. Child makes sense. Chiori is pretty high, honestly. Higher than Navia is somewhat surprising. I mean, it does make sense. She is a support. I think people are maybe sleeping on how good Chiori is, because I like to use her on a lot of double geo comps with Zhongli, but where are people actually using Chiori? Okay, so people are using, no, not there. Interesting. Mono Ito. Despite her being pretty high up on the usage rates, individual teams are not particularly high with Chiori, which obviously tells us that people are just sort of splashing her in double geo with Zhongli. So maybe Hu Tao double geo, Arlecchino double geo, Novelette double geo, probably not. That doesn't make sense because you want Novelette passive, but I like Wanderer double geo, I like Zhao double geo. Wanderer a bit more than Zhao because Zhao has other options. Also, pretty interesting to note that Child International is very, very high. The team rankings are also interesting to talk about because this will favor set teams. Like Novelette, Kazuo, Baiju, Farina is sort of a set team. And same with Child. Child doesn't have like a wide variety of teams. Whereas characters that have more different types of team options, or like more commonly used different team options, like Novelette has tons of team options, but people just generally gravitate towards this team. Whereas people are playing Arlecchino in different ways. They're playing Mono Pyro Kino with Kazuo Zhongli, but Novelette's also just higher. But you can see Child was quite a bit lower, but he's the second most used team. So this is the best example there. You're not going to see Child again on this list unless it's that team, is basically what I'm saying. This is interesting. I didn't really try this. Kazuo with Yelan, Zhongli, Arlecchino. Interesting. I wonder if that's the first side or the second side. Oh, first, second. It says right here. Mostly second side. Interesting. I guess it makes sense. You have all your elements. You have your grouping. You're not using Bennett, but Arlecchino provides enough pyro to get through. And with Zhongli's shred provides enough to get through the second half. Hopefully this teams list gives you ideas if you're having trouble deciding. I like this. 91% of Alhaitham using this team on the second side. That's a big discrepancy. We're using Raiden National actually on the first side more often. I guess that makes sense too. Seems like Raiden as a national driver is the most common use. You're not really seeing Hyper Bloom Raiden at all here. Not on this list anyways. Shen Yun, very high. She's a very strong character. Navia, Wriothesley, Yai, Kokomi, Linny, Nilu. They're all DPSs. Like, obviously Kokomi is not. But even nowadays, she kind of is. If you're using Nilu in this Abyss, you're using Farina as your Hydro applicator. And although you do want Hydro for the second side, there's just so many good Hydro options. It explains why Ayato is so low as well. Zhao and Wanderer, they're just the Coppelius being in like every single Abyss and having such high animo res, like they can do it. Like I did get through Coppelius with Zhao, and he does work on the second side too, but it's kind of, you kind of want to tech in a Pyro, and it's kind of just a pain. You just rather, just so many DPSs. DPSs are starting to become kind of what 4-stars are. It dilutes the pool. There's so many DPSs, just like, and people have so many different DPSs that even if a DPS would be good, you're unlikely to choose one particular DPS if there's another DPS, which brings the usage rate for a lot of different DPS down to where they really could be. Like the competition is getting fierce in Genshin. There's a lot of characters. You can only clear with 2 teams. There's a lot of characters. Like even at, like, this is B tier, right? And at the bottom of B tier, it's going from Day at 5% to Navia at 19%. Like that's a wild distance to all be in B tier. Ayaka, pretty hard to use unless you're doing melt stuff. I'm surprised Ganyu melt isn't higher, although I guess, yeah, 3.2% people are preferring Ayaka. And anyone down here that's surprising. I mean, it is surprising that, I guess this is a good example. Chiori's at 25%, but not very many people have Chiori. And everyone, and a lot of people who have Chiori, she's a pretty recent character, is using her. But Ito really has, really is at the bottom. Same with Sino, same with Ganyu, same with Albedo. Even though I like to talk about Abyss usage being not that accurate, it does generally correlate with what most people agree the meta to be, with some extra spikes and dips based on what's particularly good in this Abyss. It's crazy that Venti is all the way down here. Like, he is pretty good on the second side. He's not good against the Baptist, but he's pretty good on the second side, but he's just so much lower than Kazuha. It's also crazy how low Sucrose is. Like, Sucrose is a good character, but it's kind of hard to use her in this Abyss because grouping is so important. Any characters down here that could be a little higher? I've heard people have been having some success with Candace. I tried it. You can go check out my video that I'll link at the end with my skill issue Abyss clear. Still though, you do need C6 Candace to even attempt it, and some people pointed out some ways that I still misplayed in playing it, and probably could have used her in the first half as well, although the first half has the single target capability. I don't know. I definitely think you could make Candace work. That's an example of an underrated character. Virgin Toma is another one that's super underrated down here. I think that Beto should be pretty good on the first side. Again, you're kind of useless against Coppelius, but at least the damage reduction could be nice to help you prevent you from getting one shot. And if the rest of your team is strong enough, it's not like the team has, but I'm not exactly sure what team you put her on. That's my problem with Beto, is like, in theory she's really, really good, but in practice she kind of almost needs a team built around her, and she's not like quite good enough to have a team built around her. So Beto's in kind of a tricky character. Other than that, like, Lisa Novelette's actually really good and pretty underrated. Shout out to Jamie, by the way. Other than that, I mostly agree. Like, these are the harder 5-stars to use. I'm surprised Diluc isn't like at least a little bit higher, but I guess the Shen hype has fallen off and the people have kind of settled into their actual Shen. Like Plunge Diluc is good, and he does apply Pyro, and he does have some pretty good AoE. So I think it could be quite good on the first side especially, but I think people are, if people didn't often go for Shen for their Diluc, they generally went for something else. Maybe Plunge Navi or Plunge Hu Tao, or obviously Plunge Zhao. If I were to give some criticism for this list, I would say cut off A tier at 10% instead of 5%, and then do like 9 to 2, and then put the rest, and then make a D tier in the rest. I don't know, something like that. And then character ownership rate. This is also very, very interesting information, as it can give us some context. Yeah, Chiori under 10% choice. So most people don't even have Chiori. So most people won't be figuring out how good Chiori is, because almost everybody skipped Chiori. That's kind of crazy. And then Baiju, very interesting. So he's really, really high up here, but only 25% of the people have him. I wonder if that'll go up. Like, more people have Shenhe than they do Baiju, which is quite surprising. I find it interesting how many people have Aloy, but I guess everyone got Aloy at that point. So Chiori, Risley, Linny, Albedo, Ito, Sino, Eula, Clear are the least, are all under 25% ownership rate. Very, very interesting. And then pretty much everyone has Kazuha, Nahida. Diluc is the most owned 5-star. Interesting. I like how Kazuha and Nahida are the esteemed characters that have a higher ownership rate than the standard banner roster. That's very, very interesting. And then Farina, and then Raiden is the least owned Archon, which makes sense because she is primarily a DPS. Tighnari and Dea, with a lot of more people having Tighnari than Dea, probably because they wished for him on the regular banner. And then Novelette being the most owned non-Archon, non-support. And then a lot of people having Kokomi. So I will say, despite Kokomi being a bit lower, a lot of people have her. Over 50% of people have Kokomi. Pretty impressive usage rate on her part. And then Wanderer having high usage rate, or high ownership rate as well. So very, very interesting. Let me know what your takes are out of this. I think that in general, this represents the general player usage pretty well. I don't think it really tells us how good the characters are. Well, I mean, it does. It's just, there's always caveats into what it can really tell us. So wanted to bring some light on that. And I do think it's very interesting to see what people are using. And it gives me ideas on what I should be testing out to as well. And if there's any teams that I should be testing out that I'm not really playing, like for example the Kazuha Bennett Zhongli, which I have tested, but also the Kazuha, it was the Kazuha Yolan Zhongli that really surprised me. Are there any other surprising teams? Hytham, Double Hydro Hu Tao, always a classic. Charlotte is a great character with Novelette and Farina. The Zhao team, the Zhao Exodia team, traditional Raiden National, Tighnari spread being used on the second side. I'll have to try this out. I can see that being good. I'll have to try that out a bit more. The Ayaka Freeze, 92% on the second side. Interesting. I tried to do Ayaka Freeze on the second side. How do people get through? I'm confused. How do people get through the Cryo Shield by the Iniquitous Baptist? Do you just have to burst it down before it gets the Cryo Shield up? Does the shield go away eventually? What are people? Someone explain to me in the comments how they're doing that, because I was gonna recommend freeze on the second side, and then I don't understand how you get through the cryo shield. Yeah, Nilu 95.5 on the first side. Burn Novelette, I do like Burn Novelette in this Abyss, or just Shangling with Novelette in general. Navi is really, really good on the first side, and then Ito pretty good on the first side as well. All right, there you have it, guys. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know what you use to clear the Abyss, and obviously check out my skill issue first impressions clear tier list, and check out the team's tier list, the character tier list. See how it compares to this, what I get right, what I get wrong. Let me know your thoughts. Take care. Bye for now.